Dominique Harper thought she had it all, a thriving career, a life of independence, and a heart longing for love. When she met Elias Braxton, a man whose charm matched his wealth, it seemed like fate had finally given her the happiness she deserved. Their whirlwind romance led to a fairy tale wedding and a dream honeymoon aboard his luxurious yacht, the Seraphim. But sometimes, the most beautiful dreams hide the darkest realities. 3 days into their honeymoon, Dominique stumbled upon something she was never meant to hear, a hushed conversation behind a locked door. The words she overheard weren't the promises of a loving husband, they were something far more sinister, something that made her question the very foundation of her new life. That night, her trust shattered, and her life hung by a thread. Why would Elias Braxton, the man who had swept her off her feet, push her into the cold, unforgiving ocean? What secret was he so desperate to protect that he was willing to silence his own wife? Alone in the vast darkness, Dominique had no choice but to fight for her life against the waves, her survival a question even she couldn't answer. This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a tale of survival, justice, and the chilling truths hidden beneath the surface of luxury. What was Elias hiding? And how did Dominique find the strength to rise from the depths, not just to survive, but to expose a man whose wealth and power masked a monstrous secret? Stay with us as we reveal the harrowing tale of love, lies, and resilience. But before we go deeper into the story, we would like to welcome you to our channel, True Crime Zone HQ. Thank you to all our viewers and a special shout out to our subscribers for your continued support. Together, we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button if you haven't. Now, let's start. Dominique Harper's life was never about shortcuts or privilege. Raised in a modest neighborhood in Southern California, her earliest memories were of her grandmother, Loretta, sitting by a sewing machine, tirelessly stitching garments. Loretta wasn't just a seamstress, she was a pillar of resilience. After losing Dominique's mother at a young age, Loretta took on the responsibility of raising her granddaughter with a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words could. It was Loretta who taught Dominique that life's challenges could be overcome with hard work, determination, and faith. While other children played with the newest toys or attended lavish birthday parties, Dominique learned the value of resourcefulness. If she wanted something, she knew she had to earn it. As a child, she helped her grandmother by organizing fabric scraps or delivering small packages to clients. Though the work wasn't glamorous, it gave Dominique a sense of pride. She saw firsthand how Loretta's hands transformed raw fabric into something beautiful, and that transformation inspired her. Dominique promised herself that one day, she would create something just as meaningful with her own life. In school, Dominique stood out, not because of wealth or popularity, but because of her determination. Teachers often remarked on her focus and maturity. While others coasted through assignments, Dominique pushed herself to excel, knowing that education was her ticket to a better life. By the time she reached high school, she had already set her sights on a career in business. Real estate, with its potential for growth and impact, fascinated her. It wasn't just about selling properties to Dominique, it was about creating opportunities and building futures. Her college years were equally challenging and rewarding. With no financial safety net, Dominique relied on scholarships, part-time jobs, and sheer willpower to earn her degree in business and real estate. It was during these formative years that Dominique discovered not only her professional aspirations but also her capacity to connect deeply with others. One of those connections was with a young man named Andrew. Andrew was unlike anyone Dominique had met. She first encountered him during an event at her college. He wasn't dressed in designer clothes or surrounded by a group of admirers. He stood quietly, observing the room with an understated confidence. Dominique, drawn to his calm presence, struck up a conversation. What began as casual small talk quickly turned into hours of sharing stories and laughter. Andrew had a way of making people feel seen and valued, and Dominique found herself intrigued by him. As their friendship grew, Dominique learned about Andrew's life. He came from a small village, a world away from the bustling city Dominique called home. His father's health was failing, and his mother had passed away when he was just a boy. Yet, despite these hardships, Andrew radiated positivity and determination. He had earned a scholarship to one of California's most prestigious universities and juggled multiple part-time jobs to support himself. Dominique admired his grit and humility. He didn't complain about his struggles. Instead, he treated each challenge as an opportunity to prove himself. For Dominique, Andrew was a revelation. He showed her that strength wasn't about appearances or status but about character. Even in his most rugged clothes, there was something magnetic about him, a presence that couldn't be ignored. He wasn't just hard-working, he was kind, thoughtful, and deeply committed to his goals. Dominique found herself falling for him, not because of what he had, but because of who he was. Their relationship deepened over time, and Dominique began to envision a future with Andrew. They talked about their dreams, their fears, and the life they wanted to build together. Dominique felt a sense of peace and purpose when she was with him, as though she had finally found someone who truly understood her. But just as quickly as their connection had blossomed, it was torn apart. One day, Andrew disappeared. There was no goodbye, no explanation, no sign of where he had gone. Dominique was left heartbroken, her world shaken by his sudden absence. She tried everything to find him, calling his friends, searching for clues, but Andrew had vanished without a trace. As the months turned into years, Dominique struggled to move on. Her career flourished, but her heart remained tethered to the memory of Andrew. No matter how successful she became, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. For years passed, and Dominique's life grew busier. Her work brought her into the company of wealthy clients and powerful figures, but none of them could fill the void left by Andrew. She met men who flaunted their wealth, their charm as polished as their expensive suits, but Dominique wasn't impressed. Her friends often encouraged her to let go of the past and focus on the present, but Dominique knew her heart wasn't easily swayed. Andrew had set a standard that no one else could meet. And then, she met Elias Braxton. At first, Dominique wasn't sure what to make of him. He was confident, well-spoken, and undeniably wealthy, but unlike others in his social circle, Elias didn't come across as shallow or self-absorbed. He seemed genuinely interested in Dominique, not just her success, but the woman behind the achievements. Over time, his charm began to wear down her defenses. For the first time since Andrew, Dominique allowed herself to believe that she might find happiness again. But as Dominique would later discover, not every connection is built on truth. While Elias's exterior seemed perfect, there was much about him that remained hidden. What began as a romance filled with promise would soon unravel into a nightmare that no one, not even Dominique, could have foreseen. But, to understand more about their relationship we need to know how they meet first. Is it coincidence? Let's explore. For Dominique, success had always been a personal journey, a mountain she climbed on her own, step by step. She was no stranger to rooms filled with powerful people, but she rarely found herself impressed. Yet, on an unremarkable afternoon at a real estate convention in Los Angeles, everything changed. Dominique was showcasing one of her finest listings, an $8 million estate perched high above the city with sweeping views and a design that married luxury with functionality. It was the kind of property that attracted clients with deep pockets and an eye for exclusivity. She moved through the room with practiced ease, describing the imported Italian marble in the foyer, the handcrafted cabinetry in the gourmet kitchen, and the infinity pool that seemed to spill into the horizon. It was a presentation she had delivered 100 times before, but this time, she felt the weight of someone's gaze. Her eyes landed on a man standing near the entrance. Unlike the others, he wasn't asking the typical questions about square footage or market trends. He seemed more interested in her than the property. "You make the house come alive," he said, his voice warm yet authoritative, as he approached her. Dominique, uncharacteristically caught off guard, smiled politely. He introduced himself as Elias Braxton, and though his name didn't immediately ring a bell, there was something about him that felt larger than life. He exuded a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. His tailored suit and subtle watch hinted at wealth, but it was the way he carried himself, calm, measured, and attentive, that made an impression. They talked for what felt like hours. Elias asked her questions that went beyond the professional, questions about her motivations, her aspirations, and her take on success. His interest felt genuine, and Dominique found herself drawn to his perspective. He was enigmatic, offering just enough about himself to intrigue her without revealing too much. By the end of the event, Dominique had given him her number, something she rarely did. She told herself it was harmless, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the spark she felt. Over the weeks that followed, Elias pursued Dominique with a determination that was both flattering and overwhelming. He sent flowers to her office, each bouquet accompanied by a handwritten note that spoke to her passions and dreams. Their first date wasn't at an expensive restaurant but at a quiet rooftop overlooking the city. They talked about everything, her upbringing, his experiences, and their shared appreciation for hard work. Elias seemed to understand her in a way no one else had, and Dominique began to let her guard down. Elias's gestures grew grander with time. A weekend trip to Napa Valley. Tickets to an exclusive art exhibition. Dinner reservations at hidden gems only the elite seemed to know about. For Dominique, it was a whirlwind of experiences she had never allowed herself to dream of. Yet, what struck her most wasn't the extravagance but the way Elias listened to her. He wasn't just attentive, he was invested. He remembered the small details, the way she took her coffee, her favorite novels, and the stories she told about her grandmother. Slowly but surely, Dominique began to believe that maybe Elias wasn't just another wealthy man trying to impress her. Maybe he was different. Then came the trip to Santorini, Greece. Elias had told her it was just a getaway, a chance to relax and escape the demands of their respective careers. Dominique had no reason to suspect otherwise. When they arrived at a private villa overlooking the Aegean Sea, she was overwhelmed by its beauty. Whitewashed walls framed against the endless blue of the ocean. Sunsets that painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. And in the quiet of one of those sunsets, Elias surprised her. "I've never met anyone like you," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Before Dominique could respond, Elias dropped to one knee, producing a ring that seemed to catch every color of the setting sun. It was a moment Dominique could never have imagined for herself, a moment so perfect it felt surreal. She said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face as Elias slipped the ring onto her finger. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her past begin to lift. Andrew's memory, though still present, seemed to fade into the background. Dominique allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Elias was the answer to the prayers she had stopped speaking aloud. Their wedding was nothing short of a masterpiece. Set against the rolling vineyards of Napa Valley, the ceremony felt like a dream brought to life. The estate, with its sprawling gardens and rustic charm, provided the perfect backdrop for the occasion. Dominique walked down the aisle in a gown that seemed to shimmer with every step, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and disbelief. She had planned every detail meticulously, yet standing there in the moment, it all felt like it had come together effortlessly. The guest list was a who's who of high society, business tycoons, politicians, and celebrities mingled under the golden afternoon sun. As Dominique approached the altar, her eyes locked with Elias's. He stood tall in a black tuxedo, his expression calm and unreadable, yet his smile seemed to reflect the same anticipation she felt. Their vows were heartfelt, spoken beneath an arch of white roses as the late afternoon light bathed the ceremony in a soft glow. To the world, they were the epitome of a power couple, poised, successful, and deeply in love. The reception was a grand affair, with live music, endless champagne, and a multi-tiered cake that seemed almost too beautiful to cut. Dominique danced with Elias under a canopy of stars, the world around them fading away as they swayed to the music. In those moments, she felt like everything she had endured, the heartache, the struggles, the sacrifices, had been leading her to this. The following morning, the couple boarded a private jet bound for the marina where Elias's yacht, the Seraphim, awaited. Dominique had heard him mention the yacht in passing, but she hadn't been prepared for what she saw. The Seraphim was less a boat and more a palace on water. Gleaming wood, marble accents, and a deck that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The staff greeted them with practiced precision, and Dominique felt a sense of awe as she stepped aboard. The days that followed felt like a fairy tale. Breakfasts on the sun-drenched deck, afternoons spent exploring hidden coves, and evenings under the stars. Elias was attentive and affectionate, making every moment feel special. For Dominique, it was everything she had dreamed of and more, or so she thought. But as the Seraphim drifted further from shore, Dominique began to notice subtle cracks in the facade of her perfect honeymoon. It started with little things, small details Dominique might have overlooked had they not seemed so out of place. The crew was efficient to the point of being mechanical, their interactions with Elias clipped and formal. Dominique noticed how they avoided her gaze, their movements deliberate but oddly stiff. When she asked Elias about it, he brushed off her concerns. "They're professionals," he said with a reassuring smile. But something about it gnawed at her. Then there were the phone calls. Elias would excuse himself at odd hours, retreating to the yacht's conference room for conversations she couldn't quite hear. When he returned, his mood seemed unchanged, yet Dominique couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. One evening, as they sat down for dinner, Dominique noticed a tense exchange between Elias and the head chef. Though the words were quiet, the tone carried weight. Dominique's questions about the incident were met with casual dismissal, but her unease continued to grow. On the third night, Dominique was awakened by the sound of whispers. Following the noise, she found herself outside the conference room. Pressing her ear to the door, she could make out fragments of a conversation, words that sent a chill racing down her spine. Shipment. Routes. Lives. Dominique's breath caught as she tried to make sense of what she was hearing. A cold realization began to settle over her: Elias wasn't the man she thought he was. And whatever he was involved in, it was dangerous. Dominique had tried to sleep, but her mind refused to quiet. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the odd moments she had noticed over the past few days. Finally, unable to ignore the growing knot in her stomach, she decided to walk around the yacht. Perhaps a few minutes of fresh air would help her think clearly. As she stepped onto the main deck, the sound of faint voices caught her attention. Following the noise, she found herself outside the yacht's conference room, a space Elias had kept locked for most of their trip. The voices were muffled but intense, rising and falling in a rhythm that suggested urgency. Dominique hesitated, her hand hovering near the door. She knew she shouldn't eavesdrop, but something told her that whatever was being discussed was far more important than decorum. She pressed her ear against the door, her breath hitching as she caught fragments of the conversation. "The shipment is ready," one voice said, calm but clipped. "We'll need to adjust the route." Too many eyes on the original location. Dominique frowned, confusion flickering across her face. Shipment? Route? What did they mean? And then, the words that froze her in place: "How many lives are we moving this time?" Her blood turned cold. Lives. Not products, not cargo, lives. The voice that responded was one she knew all too well. It was Elias. "Enough to meet the demand," he said, his tone steady, as if he were discussing nothing more significant than a business transaction. Dominique's heart pounded in her chest. She strained to catch more, her mind racing to piece together what she was hearing. They weren't talking about ordinary logistics or shipments. They were discussing human lives, people being traded, transported, and sold like commodities. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Elias, the man she had trusted with her heart, was involved in human trafficking. Her knees felt weak as she stumbled back from the door, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what she had just discovered. The man who had promised her a life of happiness and security was a monster hiding behind wealth and charm. Panic surged through her as she realized the danger she was in. She was alone on a yacht in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by people who worked for Elias. If he found out she knew, what would he do? The weight of that question nearly paralyzed her, but Dominique knew she couldn't stay there. She needed to think, to figure out a way to escape. Quietly, she retreated to their suite, her mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. She paced the room, her thoughts spiraling. She couldn't ignore what she had heard, but confronting Elias felt like walking into a trap. Still, the idea of staying silent was unbearable. She had to confront him. She had to know how the man she thought she loved could be capable of such atrocities. When Elias returned later that night, he entered the suite as if nothing had happened, his expression calm and his demeanor unchanged. Dominique, however, couldn't hold back. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." He looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong, Dominique?" he asked, his tone soothing, almost rehearsed. She hesitated, the weight of her discovery pressing down on her. "I heard you," she said finally, her words barely more than a whisper. "I heard everything. The shipment. The lives. What are you doing, Elias?" For a moment, Elias said nothing, his eyes fixed on her. Then, he smiled, a cold, detached smile that sent a chill down Dominique's spine. "You shouldn't have been listening," he said quietly, his tone devoid of warmth. Dominique's hands shook as she stepped back. "You're trafficking people," she said, her voice breaking. "You lied to me. You lied about everything." Elias took a step toward her, his expression darkening. "Dominique," he said, his voice low and menacing, "you don't understand. This is bigger than you or me. It's business. It's survival." "Survival?" she repeated, anger flaring through her fear. "You're destroying lives, Elias. You're a monster." Elias's face hardened, and for the first time, Dominique saw the mask slip. "You've seen too much," he said, his voice cold and final. "I can't let you ruin everything I've built." Before she could react, he grabbed her arm, his grip unrelenting. "Elias, don't do this," she pleaded, panic rising in her chest. But he didn't respond. He dragged her out of the suite and onto the deck, the cool night air hitting her like a slap. "Elias, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "You don't have to do this." But Elias's expression was resolute. Without a word, he shoved her over the railing. Dominique's scream echoed into the night as she fell, her body plunging into the freezing ocean below. The water hit her like a wall, the cold stealing the air from her lungs as she struggled to resurface. The last thing she saw before the waves swallowed her was Elias, standing above her, his silhouette framed against the moonlight. The water was colder than Dominique had imagined, every breath a struggle as the icy waves closed over her. Her dress, soaked and heavy, clung to her body, dragging her down as she fought to stay afloat. The lights of the Seraphim grew smaller with every passing second, and Dominique realized with a sinking heart that no one was coming to save her. She kicked her legs furiously, her arms slicing through the water as she tried to keep her head above the surface. Each wave seemed to mock her efforts, pushing her under and filling her mouth with salt water. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed for air, but Dominique refused to give up. Memories of her grandmother flashed through her mind, of Loretta working tirelessly to give Dominique a better life. She thought of Andrew, of the love she had lost and the betrayal she had just uncovered. A wave of anger surged through her, giving her the strength to keep fighting. Hours passed, or at least it felt like it. Dominique's body ached, her movements growing sluggish as exhaustion set in. Just when she thought she couldn't go on, a faint light appeared on the horizon. It was a Coast Guard patrol boat, its beam cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Summoning the last of her strength, Dominique waved her arms weakly, her voice barely above a whisper as she cried for help. The boat drew closer, its crew spotting her just in time. "Man overboard," one of the officers shouted as they threw her a lifeline. Strong hands pulled her onto the deck, her body trembling from the cold. They wrapped her in blankets, their voices filled with urgency as they worked to stabilize her. Dominique's vision blurred, the world around her fading as she finally allowed herself to let go. She was alive, but her nightmare was far from over. A quick reflection before we continue: when Elias Braxton pushed Dominique Harper into the freezing ocean, he believed he had silenced her forever. But what Elias underestimated was the unbreakable spirit of the woman he betrayed. Despite the bone-chilling waters pulling her under, despite the weight of exhaustion pressing against her will, Dominique fought. She fought not only to survive but to make sure that the truth she had uncovered would see the light of day. Her resilience wasn't just about staying alive, it was about refusing to let fear dictate her actions. Dominique knew the risks. She understood that standing up to a man as powerful as Elias could cost her everything. And yet, she chose courage. She chose to act, to speak, and to fight for justice, even when the odds were stacked against her. So, now we ask you, do you think Dominique's bravery deserves recognition? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Her resilience in the face of overwhelming betrayal is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of standing for what is right. If you believe Dominique's courage deserves credit, show your support by subscribing to this channel. Together, we can honor stories like hers, stories of truth, resilience, and the fight for justice, and continue sharing the lessons they teach us all. Back to our story. The Coast Guard patrol boat that rescued Dominique Harper carried more than a woman pulled from the brink of death. It carried the beginnings of a truth that would unravel one of the most elaborate facades of power and wealth. Weak but resolute, Dominique lay in a hospital bed, her body recovering from hours in the freezing ocean, but her mind was focused on a singular goal: justice. When the Coast Guard first questioned her about what had happened, Dominique told them everything. She spoke of Elias, the man she had married, and the horrifying truth she had uncovered about his involvement in human trafficking. Her words tumbled out with urgency, painting a vivid picture of the betrayal that had led to her fall into the ocean. But her story, as compelling as it was met with hesitation. Elias Braxton was not just any man. He was wealthy, well-connected, and known for his charm and philanthropy. To the outside world, he was a symbol of success and respectability. Accusing someone like Elias wasn't just difficult, it was dangerous. The officers exchanged uncertain glances, their skepticism palpable. But Dominique refused to back down. "I'm not making this up," she insisted, her voice steady despite the emotional toll. "I heard him. I heard them. They're trafficking people, and Elias is at the center of it. Please, you have to believe me." It was a fragile beginning, but Dominique's determination was unshakable. She understood the stakes. If she didn't fight to expose Elias, who would? In the days that followed, Dominique's claims sparked an investigation, though progress was slow. Authorities were cautious, wary of making accusations against a man of Elias's stature without solid evidence. Dominique knew that her word alone wouldn't be enough to bring him down. She needed proof, and she needed allies. That ally came in the form of Amira Daniels, the Seraphim's head chef. Amira was known for her discretion, a trait that had kept her employed by Elias for years. But Dominique's near-death experience had shaken something loose in her. Amira had always known there was more to Elias than met the eye, but she had kept her distance, fearing the repercussions of speaking out. Now, with Dominique's story gaining traction, Amira found herself at a crossroads. When investigators approached her, Amira hesitated. The weight of what she knew was almost too much to bear. She had seen Dominique fall, or rather, she had seen Elias push her. That night replayed in her mind over and over, the sound of Dominique's pleading voice, Elias's cold command, and the way the crew had looked away, their silence complicit. Finally, Amira decided she couldn't stay silent any longer. "I saw what happened," she told the investigators, her voice trembling but firm. "She didn't fall. He pushed her." Her testimony was a turning point. With Amira's account corroborating Dominique's claims, the authorities began to dig deeper into Elias's world. They subpoenaed financial records, combed through encrypted communications, and tracked the movements of the Seraphim on the night of the incident. What they found was a web of offshore accounts, suspicious transactions, and coded messages that painted a damning picture of Elias's criminal empire. As the investigation unfolded, more and more people came forward. Crew members, former employees, and even business associates who had been complicit in Elias's operations began to speak out, each piece of testimony adding to the growing case against him. Dominique watched from the sidelines, her resolve unwavering. She knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she also knew she had started something that couldn't be stopped. With Amira by her side, she began to see the possibility of justice, not just for herself, but for all the victims of Elias's greed and ambition. As the investigation into Elias Braxton's activities intensified, the facade he had carefully constructed began to crumble. Dominique Harper's testimony had set the wheels in motion, and Amira Daniels's courage had added weight to the allegations. But it was the evidence unearthed by law enforcement that exposed the full extent of Elias's empire. Investigators pored over his financial records, uncovering a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies designed to obscure the true nature of his dealings. These accounts weren't just hiding money, they were the financial lifeline of a sprawling network that trafficked people across continents, supplied illegal arms to conflict zones, and facilitated black market operations that thrived on human suffering. Each document, each encrypted email, each wire transfer painted a clearer picture of the man behind the mask. The Seraphim, his pride and joy, became a key piece of evidence. Its routes were meticulously traced, revealing patterns that aligned with known trafficking hotspots. Witness testimonies from crew members, who had once stayed silent out of fear, confirmed the yacht's role in transporting people under the guise of exclusive voyages. The connections were undeniable, and the scale of the operation was staggering. Meanwhile, Elias remained publicly unshaken. In Manhattan's elite circles, he continued to host opulent events, smiling for the cameras and shaking hands with politicians and CEOs. To the world, he was still the philanthropist who donated to charities and funded educational programs. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in. The turning point came when a cache of encrypted messages was recovered from Elias's private server. These messages, painstakingly decoded by cybercrime specialists, revealed explicit instructions for operations that left no room for doubt. The language was coded, but the intent was clear: shipments referred to people, routes detailed illegal arms trades, and payments funneled through shadowy intermediaries showed just how far Elias's influence reached. The evidence was irrefutable, and law enforcement decided it was time to act. But they didn't just want to arrest Elias, they wanted to make a statement. His capture needed to be public, a message to the world that no one, not even someone as powerful as Elias Braxton, was above the law. On a crisp autumn evening, Elias hosted one of his most extravagant galas yet. The event, held in a luxurious Manhattan penthouse, was a celebration of his latest, philanthropic initiative, an elaborate ruse to divert attention from the growing whispers about his activities. The guest list was a who's who of society's elite, business magnates, influential politicians, and international dignitaries. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation as guests mingled beneath glittering chandeliers. Elias, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, moved through the crowd with his signature charm. To anyone watching, he was the perfect host, gracious, attentive, and composed. But as the evening wore on, there was a shift in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension that only a few noticed. The elevator doors at the far end of the room slid open, and a team of federal agents stepped out, their presence impossible to ignore. They moved with purpose, cutting through the opulence like a blade. Conversations hushed as the guests turned to watch, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as they realized who the agents were there for. Elias, standing near the balcony with a glass of champagne in hand, noticed the commotion. At first, he remained still, his face a mask of calm. But as the agents approached, his grip on the glass tightened. The lead agent stepped forward, his voice firm and clear. "Elias Braxton, you are under arrest for conspiracy, human trafficking, and multiple counts of international crimes," he said, producing a pair of handcuffs. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the gravity of the situation set in. Elias's carefully curated world was unraveling before the eyes of the very people he had spent years deceiving. He placed the glass down on a nearby table and straightened his jacket, his composure faltering only for a moment. As the agents cuffed his wrists and began to lead him away, the cameras flashed, capturing the fall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. The murmurs of disbelief among the guests grew louder, but no one stepped forward to defend him. In that moment, Elias Braxton was no longer a symbol of power and success, he was a criminal exposed for what he truly was. The news spread like wildfire, the headlines dominating every major outlet by morning. Millionaire mogul arrested in trafficking scandal. Elias Braxton's empire crumbles amid criminal allegations. The images of him being led away in handcuffs became iconic, a stark reminder that even the most powerful could be held accountable. For Dominique, watching the footage from the safety of her hospital room was both a vindication and a reminder of the nightmare she had survived. She had fought to expose Elias, and now the world was finally seeing the truth. But as satisfying as his arrest was, Dominique knew this was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over. Not too long after the arrest, the trial date was set, and as the trial date approached, the case against him grew stronger. Prosecutors pieced together a damning portfolio of evidence, encrypted communications, financial records, witness testimonies, and the harrowing accounts of survivors who had been victimized by his criminal operations. The trial was set to be a spectacle. Every major news outlet prepared for wall-to-wall coverage, their cameras poised outside the courthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, filled with reporters, legal experts, and members of the public who wanted to see justice served. Elias, dressed impeccably as always, entered the courtroom with his head held high, but the confidence he once wielded so effortlessly had faded. His legal team was among the best money could buy, but even they knew the odds were stacked against him. Dominique Harper was among the first to testify. As she took the stand, the room fell silent. The woman who had once been seen as nothing more than Elias's bride now stood as a symbol of resilience. Her voice, steady but tinged with emotion, carried through the courtroom as she recounted the events of her honeymoon. She spoke of the whispers she had overheard outside the locked door, the chilling realization of Elias's true nature, and the moment he had pushed her overboard into the freezing ocean. "I trusted him," Dominique said, her eyes fixed on Elias. "I believed in the life he promised me. But that man sitting there," she pointed toward him, her hand trembling slightly, "he's not the man I thought I married. He's a man who profits from human suffering. He's a man who tried to silence me because I discovered the truth." The defense tried to shake her, to paint her as someone seeking revenge or attention. They questioned her memory, her motives, and even her emotions. But Dominique didn't falter. She answered every question with clarity, her determination unshakable. By the time she stepped down from the stand, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that she was telling the truth. Then came Amira Daniels. The chef who had spent years working aboard the Seraphim carried a quiet strength as she took the stand. Amira's testimony was precise and devastating. She described the events of that fateful night, how she had seen Elias push Dominique overboard, and the way the crew had been conditioned to look the other way. "I stayed silent for too long," Amira admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "But when I saw Dominique fighting for her life, for the truth, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Elias Braxton didn't just betray her, he betrayed everyone who ever trusted him. Amira's detailed account of Elias's operations on the yacht provided crucial context to the evidence already presented. She confirmed the coded language used in his communications and described the fear that permeated life aboard the Seraphim. Her bravery in coming forward resonated with everyone in the courtroom. As the prosecution laid out its case, the full scope of Elias's crimes came into focus. The jury listened to testimony from survivors, each recounting their experiences with heartbreaking detail. Financial experts explained how Elias had used shell companies and offshore accounts to fund his criminal network. Cybersecurity specialists demonstrated how encrypted messages linked Elias directly to human trafficking rings and illegal arms deals. Elias's defense team worked tirelessly to deflect the accusations, suggesting that the evidence was circumstantial and that the witnesses had ulterior motives. They painted Elias as a successful businessman whose operations were misunderstood, but their arguments couldn't hold up against the mountain of proof. In the closing arguments, the prosecution made it clear that Elias Braxton was not just a man who had committed crimes, he was a man who had built an empire on the exploitation of others. "This is a man who believed he was untouchable," the lead prosecutor said. But no amount of money, power, or influence can erase the truth. When the jury retired to deliberate, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Hours felt like days as everyone waited for the verdict. Dominique sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly together, her heart pounding with anticipation. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, their expression somber as they read the verdict. "We find the defendant, Elias Braxton, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled to file breaking news updates, and spectators whispered to one another in disbelief. For Dominique, the words felt both liberating and surreal. Elias Braxton, the man who had nearly taken her life, was being held accountable for his actions. The sentencing followed swiftly. The judge, in a stern and measured tone, declared that Elias would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. The once untouchable tycoon was now just another inmate, stripped of his power and privilege. But now, we ask you, was justice truly served? Does Elias's sentence bring the closure and accountability that victims like Dominique deserve, or is there more that society should do to ensure such atrocities are never repeated? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think this outcome was enough? If not, what else do you believe should be done to fight against these crimes? Leave your insights in the comments section below. And if you believe justice was served, if you think Dominique's resilience and the relentless pursuit of truth deserve recognition, show your support by subscribing to this channel. Then what's next? Dominique Harper emerged from the trial not just as a survivor, but as a voice for those who had been silenced. She founded an organization dedicated to combating human trafficking, using her platform to raise awareness and advocate for victims. Her story became a beacon of hope and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable betrayal, it was possible to rise and fight for justice. As for Elias Braxton, his name became synonymous with greed and cruelty. His empire, once celebrated, was dismantled piece by piece. The wealth he had amassed was redirected to funds that supported his victims, ensuring that his legacy would forever be tied to the people he had tried to destroy. For Dominique, the journey wasn't about erasing the pain, it was about transforming it. She knew the scars would always remain, but they were a testament to her strength. And as she stood before a crowd at a conference on human rights, sharing her story, she realized that her survival wasn't just her own. It was a victory for everyone who refused to let the worst of humanity define them. Her transformation from a victim to an advocate became a story of resilience, one that reached far beyond the confines of her own experience. After the trial, Dominique dedicated herself to ensuring that no one else would have to endure the horrors she had uncovered. She established an organization called Voices of Freedom, focused on combating human trafficking and supporting survivors. Dominique traveled across the country, speaking at schools, conferences, and community events, sharing her story not as a tale of tragedy but as a testament to the power of courage and determination. Through her work, Dominique provided resources to those trapped in cycles of exploitation, partnering with law enforcement and nonprofits to rescue victims and bring perpetrators to justice. She helped create safe havens for survivors, offering not only shelter but the tools to rebuild their lives. For Dominique, this work wasn't just a mission, it was a promise she had made to herself the night she fought to survive in the ocean. Amira Daniels became one of her closest allies. Together, they worked to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced, using their experiences to push for stronger policies and greater accountability. Amira's Café, Second Chances, became a beacon of hope in the community, a place where survivors could find comfort and begin to heal. But Dominique's journey wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, of exhaustion, when the weight of the fight seemed almost too much to bear. Yet every time she looked into the eyes of someone her organization had helped, she found the strength to keep going. Each success was a reminder that her survival wasn't just a personal victory, it was a step toward a better future for others. Dominique's story isn't just about uncovering the truth. It's about what comes after, about the strength it takes to stand against the odds and turn pain into purpose. Her name became synonymous with resilience, her work inspiring countless others to speak out and fight for what is right. Now, for the last time, the question turns to you. If you were in Dominique's position, would you have had the strength to fight back? Could you have risked everything, your safety, your reputation, even your life, to expose a truth so horrifying? And if you uncovered a secret that could cost you everything, what would you do? Dominique Harper made a choice to act, to fight, and to rebuild. Her story reminds us that the power of truth can overcome even the most formidable forces. But that power only exists if we choose to wield it. If Dominique's story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have made the same decisions she did? And what does her story teach us about courage and resilience? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others. Together, we can raise awareness about the importance of truth, justice, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to change everything.